"You, janitor, what do you think I just said?" The room went still. The voice came sharp, decisive, from the center of the conference hall where the new CEO stood under the glare of the overhead lights. Marcus, in his gray uniform, had just turned the corner with a mop bucket when the words hit him. His shoulders stiffened. He hadn't meant to be seen. He never was. But this time the moment dragged him in. Saori Ariki, the company's newly appointed CEO, had just finished a brief welcome in Japanese to the gathered managers, and her follow-up line, half dare, half mockery, was now hanging in the air like static. "Translate it, and I'll give you my salary for the month," she added, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A chuckle rippled across the room. Some of the men in suits laughed a little too loudly. Others looked around, unsure whether to join in or stay quiet. Marcus set his mop aside. He hadn't heard that particular tone in years, but the sentence itself, he knew it, like he knew the smell of pine-scented cleaner or the creak in his left knee. It wasn't a challenge for him. It was memory. She said. Marcus replied calmly, "The one who understands silence speaks the loudest." A whoosh fell. Everyone turned. Saori blinked. The woman who had swept into the company with her MBA from Stanford and a reputation for slicing inefficiency with surgical precision now stood face to face with a man no one ever really noticed. A man who had cleaned the lobby floor every night for the last 3 years. "And who are you?" she asked, her expression unreadable. "Marcus King," he said, voice steady. "I mop the floors." Silence again, heavier this time, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. A young manager near the back cleared his throat but said nothing. The assistant VP of finance looked down at her shoes. Saori tilted her head slightly. "Where did you learn to speak Japanese?" Marcus shrugged. "Lived there, 8 years. She smiled now, genuine or intrigued. It was hard to tell. "Well then, Mr. King," she said, "why don't you join me upstairs?" He hesitated. A dozen thoughts raced through his mind, each one louder than the last. This isn't my place. What are they going to say? This feels like a trap. But the silence in the room, the kind he had spoken of, was already shifting. So, he followed her. The elevator ride was quiet, but not uncomfortable. When they reached the executive floor, Saori led him into her office glass walls, minimalist design, a scroll of calligraphy hanging behind her desk. It read, "Gaman, endurance, patience, silent strength." She gestured for him to sit. He didn't. "I didn't mean to interrupt downstairs," he said. "You didn't," she replied. "You answered a question, honestly." Marcus glanced around. Everything in the room was polished, curated, not a fingerprint out of place. "Your pronunciation is perfect," she said. "Your accent is native." "My wife was Japanese," Marcus said quietly. "Taught me, before she passed." Saori's expression softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded. She folded her hands on the desk. "I'll be honest with you, Marcus. I'm planning a cultural integration initiative here. Something real, not just a training video HR forces people to watch. And I need help, from someone who knows both sides." "I clean floors," he said. "And you just cleaned the air in that room better than anyone in a $3,000 suit," she replied. Marcus almost smiled, but stopped himself. "You're serious?" "I am." He looked down. The urge to say no came fast. Old instincts. Keep your head down. Do the work. Don't get involved. He had learned that the hard way. "I don't belong in that room," he said. "Maybe," she said. "But you just proved you don't belong outside of it either." There it was again, that disarming honesty. "I'll think about it," Marcus said. "That's all I ask." As he walked back to the elevator, something shifted. Not in the air, but in him. He wasn't dreaming of promotions or power. But he had felt something new, or maybe something old, something he thought he'd buried. Someone had looked at him, and this time, really seen him. By the next morning, the office was buzzing not with work, but with whispers. "The janitor?" one voice hissed behind a break room door. "He just walked into the CEO's office like he owned the place." Another muttered, "I heard he corrected her Japanese." In front of everyone. The tale twisted itself tighter with each telling, growing teeth and legs, crawling through departments and cubicles. Marcus, meanwhile, returned to his usual rhythm, early shift, mop in hand, keeping to himself. But something had changed. People saw him now. Not all of them acknowledged him, but their eyes flicked his way, sometimes with curiosity, other times with suspicion. He felt it in the stiffness of greetings, the way a few staffers turned their backs when he passed. It wasn't hatred, it was discomfort. He had disrupted the balance, crossed an invisible line meant to stay uncrossed. That afternoon, a man in a crisply pressed shirt cornered him by the elevator. "You're Marcus, right?" he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Cultural team meetings down in 4B. You're expected." The door slid open before Marcus could reply, and the man stepped in, leaving behind only the smell of too much cologne and a sense of obligation. Marcus sighed. He'd hoped Saori would forget, that it had been a moment, a flicker of connection, not a commitment. But here he was summoned. Room 4B was filled with sleek chairs, glossy portfolios, and faces that didn't look like his. Middle managers, consultants, HR leads, all with practiced smiles and well-ironed confidence. Saori stood at the front, arms crossed, scanning the room. Her eyes lit up briefly when she saw him. "Marcus, thank you for coming." He nodded. A few people looked his way with curiosity thinly veiled behind polite smiles. One woman leaned toward her neighbor and whispered something behind her palm. Marcus took a seat near the back. Saori began. "Our goal is to build an internal culture that reflects not just diversity but understanding, not policies, people." Her voice was calm, firm. She spoke like someone used to being heard. As she continued, she gestured toward a whiteboard filled with diagrams and keywords. Cross-cultural empathy, employee dignity, shared narratives. Marcus felt out of place. The words were right, but the air felt too clean, like a showroom version of reality. Still, he listened. Then about 20 minutes in, Saori said, "We're also launching a weekly workshop series, and I've asked Marcus to help lead the pilot program." A few necks craned in his direction. A man near the front cleared his throat, barely hiding a smirk. "With all due respect," he said, "what qualifies a janitor to run a professional workshop?" The room tensed. Saori didn't flinch. "Marcus has lived in two cultures more intimately than most of us ever will. He doesn't just know language, he knows loss, transition, resilience. He's exactly who we need." The man smiled politely but didn't look convinced. Marcus shifted in his chair. "I'm not a teacher," he said quietly. "I'm just someone who's seen what happens when people stop listening to each other." Saori nodded. "Then teach us that." The meeting ended with lukewarm applause. People filed out with murmured goodbyes and half-curious glances. One woman lingered. "I liked what you said," she offered, "but just be careful. This place doesn't like change." She gave a tight smile and left. Back in the janitor's closet, a cramped room with a single chair and a wall of cleaning supplies, Marcus sat down. His hands rested on his knees, mind buzzing. Part of him wanted to walk away. The other part, the part that had once held Ayumi's hand at her hospital bedside in Kyoto, told him to stay, to build something. Later that night, he returned to the building. It was quiet, lights low, the hum of air conditioning the only sound. He liked the stillness, no eyes, no politics, just floors to clean and time to think. As he worked, he passed the big conference room, still open, whiteboard markers uncapped. On a whim, he stepped inside. He stared at the whiteboard, then picked up a marker and wrote, "You can't connect cultures if you're afraid to sit at the same table." He stared at it for a moment, then added underneath, "Marcus King." The next morning, when employees returned, they saw the quote still there, unwiped, unchallenged. It started a small conversation in the cafeteria. "Did you see what he wrote? It's actually kind of deep. Yeah, deeper than half the crap we hear in those strategy meetings." But with attention came friction. A few days later, Marcus found his cart moved from its usual place. A snide comment scrawled on the handle in red marker. "Stay in your lane, janitor." He erased it, said nothing, but the weight pressed heavier that day. When he reported it to HR, the woman behind the desk offered a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "We'll look into it," she said in the tone of someone already forgetting. Later, Saori called him in again. "I saw the quote," she said, sitting cross-legged behind her desk. "Thank you. I didn't ask permission," he said. "You don't need it." She stood, walked to the window, stared out at the city. "Do you know why I said what I said that day? About the salary? I figured it was a joke. It wasn't. I was testing the room, seeing who was bold enough to speak." She turned. "You were, and I need that voice, even if the others don't understand it yet." He exhaled. I'm not trying to prove anything." "Good," she said, "because you already have." As he left her office, the halls still felt cold, but the silence had shifted again. Not gone, not hostile, just waiting. Waiting for the next word, the next step, the next person brave enough to speak. The first workshop was scheduled for Friday at noon. Marcus stood outside the glass-walled conference room with a dry mouth and a clipboard he didn't need. The hallway was quiet, except for the ticking of a wall clock that sounded far too loud. Inside, chairs were arranged in a circle instead of the usual boardroom rows. Saori had insisted on that: no podium, no hierarchy, just people talking face to face. Marcus had argued for something simpler, something less exposed. But Saori had said, "The moment we hide behind a table, we lose the chance to actually see each other." So he had agreed. The doors opened one by one. First came Dana from HR, polite but guarded. Then Joseph from operations, arms crossed, face already skeptical. A few others trickled in, some curious, some silent, all carrying the invisible armor of office politics. Marcus offered quiet nods. No grand introduction, no name tag. Just him and a room full of strangers who didn't know if they should be learning from him or grading him. When Saori entered last, she didn't speak. She sat beside Marcus and let him take the floor. He cleared his throat. "I don't have a PowerPoint," he began. A few smiled. "I don't have a textbook. I've got stories, some of mine. Some from people who've never been in this room." Silence followed. He wasn't used to holding attention. Not like this. But they were listening. "When I was 28, he said, "I married a woman who barely spoke English. We met in Osaka, where I was working odd jobs and running from things I didn't want to face back home. She taught me more in silence than most people teach in shouting. Her name was Ayumi." A pause. He let the name sit in the air. "Ayumi taught me that understanding isn't about agreement. It's about presence, listening without needing to reply. That's what we're doing here, listening." End quote. For the next 30 minutes they talked. Not all at once. Not freely, but they did. Dana admitted she often avoided conversations with coworkers whose accents she couldn't understand, not out of cruelty, but because she was afraid of embarrassing them or herself. Joseph shared how he'd once made a joke in a meeting that unintentionally offended a colleague from India, and how no one ever explained why the man left the team shortly after. Little by little, the room softened. They weren't solving racism. They weren't fixing corporate culture in an hour. But for once, they weren't pretending. At the end, Marcus stood. "Thank you," he said. "Next week, same time, no homework. Just come back, if you want to." As the others filed out, Joseph lingered. "You're better at this than half the consultants we've paid 6 figures for," he said, almost reluctantly. Marcus didn't reply, but the words stayed with him longer than they should have. In the elevator ride back down to the janitor's storage room, his reflection stared back from the chrome panel. He still wore the same faded uniform, still smelled like disinfectant and old floors. But something was shifting, like the weight of years was beginning to shift off one shoulder. Later that evening, as he was cleaning the executive kitchen, he overheard 2 employees talking just around the corner. "You know they're only doing this workshop thing because Ariki's trying to play the diversity game," one of them said. "Per stunt. Bet she dumps it after the next shareholder call," the other snorted. "And that janitor? He's a gimmick, a mascot." The laughter that followed was short and sharp. Marcus didn't move. He waited for the footsteps to fade before stepping into view, silent and alone. He didn't write anything on the whiteboard that night. He didn't quote a proverb or add a new message. He just cleaned. The next day, Saori called him to her office again. She had a paper in her hand. "Someone from the board sent this," she said, sliding it across her desk. It was a memo, sterile, formal, brimming with careful language. It questioned the appropriateness of having a janitor lead internal trainings, cited optics, expressed concern about employee morale. Marcus read it twice. "You going to stop the workshops?" he asked. Saori leaned back in her chair. "Number, but I need you to be prepared. There will be pushback, not just from boardrooms, from hallways, from stairs, whispers. You already know that." He nodded. "I do." "Then why keep going?" she asked. "Because," he said, folding the memo in half, "someone has to." That night, Marcus sat at home in his 1-bedroom apartment on the west side of the city. The television was on, but he wasn't watching. He pulled an old photo from the drawer, him and Ayumi, sitting on the steps outside their first apartment in Kyoto, both holding convenience store ice cream bars and laughing like the world didn't know their names. He studied her smile. She had always believed in speaking up, even when silence was safer, especially when silence was safer. He placed the photo back, stood, and began jotting ideas for next week's session. Not quotes, not strategy, just questions, real ones. When was the last time you felt invisible? What makes someone belong? What's one thing you've never said out loud at work but wanted to? The next morning, he posted them anonymously on the bulletin board in the main lobby. By lunch, post-it notes had begun to appear beneath each one. Short answers, honest ones, painful sometimes. When I was passed up for promotion 3 times. When I saw a teammate mocked for her hijab. When my manager introduced me as the diversity hire, the janitor's board, they began calling it. But no one took it down. And though the emails from the board continued, though Marcus returned each night to the same closet, the same tools, something had begun to change, not in policy, not yet, but in people. They were starting to see what was always there. Not just him, but themselves. Flawed, listening, trying. If Marcus's story moved you, click like to help spread the message of justice and quiet courage. Leave a comment if you believe that everyone, no matter their role or background, deserves to be heard and respected. Monday came with a glossy sheen. The lobby had been polished twice, the boardroom prepared with catered sandwiches and fresh flowers, none of it for Marcus, of course, but for the cameras. The company's internal communications team was filming a diversity success story, and Sari had insisted Marcus be featured. "It'll be good," she'd told him. "Visibility matters." He had nodded, but with unease tightening his jaw. Visibility didn't always mean value. It often meant exposure, and exposure meant risk. Still, he showed up. The same uniform pressed, the same boots scuffed at the toes. When he walked into the conference room, the production crew was already setting up lights. Someone offered him makeup. He declined. A young assistant handed him a printout. "Just a few talking points," she said. He scanned them. Empowerment, community, progress. Words that sounded nice in marketing decks but felt hollow when scrubbed onto your life like polish on a worn floor. The interview began. Sari opened with grace, speaking about the company's inclusive evolution, about how unexpected voices had become vital. Then the host turned to Marcus. The cameras blinked. The air thickened. "Tell us," the host said, "what does this experience mean to you?" Marcus paused. In his mind, he saw the red marker message, "Stay in your lane." He saw the board memo questioning his value. He saw the post-it notes, the honest, broken, hopeful ones on the lobby wall. And then he saw Ayumi standing in the kitchen years ago, pointing to his chest and saying, "Your story doesn't need permission." He looked at the camera. "It's not about me," he said, voice low but steady. "It's about seeing people, the ones you walk past every day, the ones who clean your spaces, who don't wear badges that say executive. We don't need to be empowered, we need to be acknowledged." A silence stretched across the room. The host smiled, a bit too tightly. "Beautifully said," she replied, though her tone suggested she preferred a shorter, more palatable answer. After the shoot, Marcus slipped away quickly. No drinks, no small talk, just back to work. He was vacuuming the hallway near legal affairs when he noticed someone watching him. An older man in a tailored gray suit, face unreadable. Marcus nodded politely. The man stepped forward. "You're Marcus?" "Yes, sir." "I'm Richard Lambert, Executive Vice President." Marcus didn't reply, unsure where this was going. "I watched the interview," Lambert continued. "You speak well, but there's a line between inspiration and disruption. Be mindful not to blur it." Then, with a brisk nod, he walked off. Marcus stood still, the vacuum humming quietly at his side, like a dog waiting for a command that never came. The following day, Sari called him in again. Her posture was different, stiffer, arms tight across her chest. "There's pushback," she admitted. "Some are saying this initiative is taking focus away from quarterly targets." "You mean some don't like a janitor being visible?" Marcus said evenly. She didn't deny it. "We need to be strategic," she said. "There's talk of turning the workshop into a pre-recorded video series, less interactive. So, Less human? More scalable, she replied. Marcus stared at her. When you asked me to speak, was it because you believed in what I had to say, or because you needed someone to say it? Saori didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, it was softer. At first I needed a symbol, but now I need your voice. Just help me navigate this, please. Marcus nodded, but the trust had shifted. Not broken, but cracked. Later that week, during the third workshop, attendance dropped. Only 5 showed up. Dana wasn't among them. Joseph came late and left early. The circle of chairs felt wider. Marcus kept the session short. They discussed silence, not the poetic kind, but the kind that grows between coworkers afraid to ask questions. Afterward, one young analyst approached him. Her name tag read, Chloe. I just wanted to say, my dad was a janitor, she said, voice shaking. And seeing you here, it means something, not just to me, to him. Marcus smiled, tired but genuine. Then let's make sure it keeps meaning something. That night, he stayed late. The lobby was quiet. The post-it notes were still there, more added every day. He stopped in front of one that read, I feel seen for the first time in 10 years. He stared at it, then reached into his pocket, pulled out a Sharpie, and wrote underneath, hold on to that. The world tries to erase it. As he walked away, he didn't see the security camera light flicker, but someone did. The next morning, Marcus arrived to find the bulletin board cleared. Every post-it note gone, every marker erased. In its place was a framed poster. Together we thrive. A message from corporate leadership. Generic, sanitized, safe. He stood in silence, staring at the blankness. Then Saori appeared at his side. I didn't approve this, she said. Who did? Lambert, I assume. Legal said it was becoming a liability. Marcus didn't speak. His silence was louder than protest. That night, he took the train home, head low, hands aching. But when he reached his building, there was an envelope stuck in his door. No name. Just a note inside. You're not alone. Don't let them rewrite it. See. There was no return address. No signature, just that. He folded the note carefully and tucked it into his wallet. And as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning above him, the fight didn't feel glamorous or poetic. It felt lonely, like pushing a boulder up a hill no one else believed existed. But somewhere, someone had written a note. And maybe that meant the story wasn't over yet. Maybe it was just beginning to be told the right way. The next morning began like any other. Marcus arrived early, long before the lights came on in the main offices. The air in the lobby was cool, sterile, humming with the buzz of fluorescent bulbs warming up. But something felt different, hollow. The polished floors gleamed too perfectly, as if trying to blind him from the truth he already knew something was being buried, again. He passed by the bulletin board without pausing. The corporate poster still hung there like a warning label, Together we thrive. But nowhere in that poster was the word justice or truth, or the trembling courage scribbled on a post-it note by someone desperate to be heard. He made his rounds quietly, no words, just the rhythm of a mop, the squeak of wheels on tile, the silent dialogue between a man and the walls that never spoke back. At 10:15, Chloe found him in the stairwell, where he often took his breaks in solitude. I looked for you yesterday, she said, breathless. They took down everything, didn't even ask. He nodded. I know. Did you see what they put up instead? I saw it. Her eyes narrowed. We can't let them erase this. Not again. Marcus studied her young, idealistic, still burning with a fire he remembered from his own 20s. You willing to put your name on something? He asked. She hesitated. Not long, but enough. I think so, she said. He handed her a notebook from his satchel. It was worn, pages filled with fragments, observations, quotes, his quiet record of the workplace no one had asked for. Then start here, he said. Add your own. We'll call it the archive. Not public, not yet, just real. That afternoon, Marcus was summoned by HR. Dana sat across from him, eyes tired, not unfriendly. We received a complaint, she said, folding her hands on the desk. Someone alleged that you were encouraging divisive behavior, that you've been collecting sensitive information from staff. Marcus didn't blink. I'm listening to people, that's all. Dana sighed. You know this place. Even listening becomes political when it's not on the agenda. "So what's next?" he asked. "There's going to be a review. Lambert's pushing for a formal statement of boundaries. You may be asked to suspend your workshops temporarily. And the board? They're watching. Closely." Marcus stood. "Let them." That evening, Saori called him into her office. She was pacing, bare feet on the carpet, heels discarded in the corner. "They want to shut you down," she said bluntly. "I've bought time, but only a little." "I didn't come here to be a mascot," Marcus said. "I came because you asked for truth." "I know," she said, rubbing her temples, "but truth is expensive in this place, and you're not the only one paying for it now." Marcus stepped closer. "You believe in what we're doing, Saori?" She looked up at him, eyes weary but sharp. "I believe the floor was never clean to begin with. We just kept waxing it over and over until no one noticed the cracks." He smiled despite himself. "That's poetic for a CEO. Don't let that get out," she said dryly. The next day, Chloe handed him a flash drive. "Everything people wrote in the archive notebook," she whispered. "Typed it all up, names removed." He opened it that night in his apartment. Lines jumped off the screen. "I've worked here 12 years and never once been asked what I think. They call me diversity hire when they think I can't hear. When my father died, not one manager came to the funeral. I smile every day so they won't ask if I'm struggling." Each entry cut like glass, but in their rawness there was a pulse, an undeniable heartbeat of shared invisibility. And maybe, just maybe, a reckoning. Marcus printed them, every single one, hundreds of pages. The next morning, he placed them quietly on every break room table, every copier station, slid them under office doors like truth in paper form. No name, no explanation. Just the archive anonymous, uncensored, and absolutely real. By noon, it was all anyone talked about. Some were angry, some scared, others relieved. At 3 p.m., Marcus was called to an emergency meeting with Lambert, Saori, and HR. The room was colder than usual. Lambert was already standing. "Do you understand the liability you've created?" he barked. Marcus remained calm. "I didn't create it. I revealed it. That's not your role." "Maybe it should be," Marcus said. Silence hung between them like fog. Finally, Saori spoke. "We can't fire him," she said. "It would ignite everything." "Then what do you suggest?" Lambert growled. "We listen," she said. "We take this seriously. Or we lose the people who make this place more than just numbers on a spreadsheet." Lambert stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. Maybe she had. But Marcus saw something change behind her eyes' resolve, not just strategy. He knew now that she wasn't protecting him. She was choosing the mirror over the mask. After the meeting, Marcus walked out into the courtyard behind the building. The sun was starting to set, soft amber bleeding through the skyline. Chloe was sitting on a bench, notebook in her lap. She looked up. "So? They're scared," he said. "That means they're finally seeing it." She smiled. "Good. Let's keep going." "Even if it costs us?" he asked. "Especially if it does," she answered. As the shadows grew longer, Marcus thought of the mop, the bleach, the floors he still had to clean tonight. But for the first time, it didn't feel like erasure. It felt like groundwork, like preparing a surface for something better to be built. And if he had to mop that floor with one hand while holding truth in the other, then so be it. He'd done harder things for far less noble reasons. Some revolutions didn't start with fire or fury. Some began with a question scribbled on a post-it, a story whispered in a stairwell, a janitor refusing to stay in his lane. And as the wind rustled the trees, Marcus closed his eyes and smiled. The ground was shifting, quietly, irrevocably, and he was right where he needed to be. By Wednesday, the archive had become a phantom in the building. No one officially acknowledged it, yet everyone had read it. It spread in whispers, in knowing glances across cubicles, in silent nods by the elevators. Marcus continued his work as usual, mop in hand, keys at his waist, but now every hallway felt heavier with consequence. He wasn't just cleaning anymore. He was navigating a terrain that had suddenly turned political and dangerous. Chloe was the first to notice the shift. "People are watching me," she told Marcus near the loading dock. "Not like before, like they're deciding something." Marcus didn't need details. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her fingers fidgeted with the corner of her ID badge. "It's just, you think you're ready to be seen until you are, and then you realize being invisible wasn't the worst thing." Marcus put a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, remember that." Upstairs, Saori faced her own storm. The board had scheduled a private meeting with her, no agenda, no notes, just a cold request for presence. When she entered the glass-walled room, all eyes turned toward her, not with hostility, but with calculation. Lambert opened the meeting. "There are concerns," he said. "This archive, while anonymous, is clearly connected to the employee engagement project you initiated." Saori didn't flinch. "It's not official company communication," she replied. "Then disavow it," another board member said. "Publicly, say it was unsanctioned." "And what message does that send?" she countered. "That honesty only matters when it's pre-approved?" A long silence followed. Then Lambert leaned forward. "We gave you latitude, Saori. Don't mistake it for immunity." She met his stare. "I know exactly what I have, and I know what I'm willing to risk." That afternoon, IT quietly removed all personal USB access from company devices. "Security upgrade," the memo read. Marcus found his email access restricted. Chloe's badge wouldn't open certain conference rooms anymore. Little by little, the system retaliated, not loudly, but with quiet, methodical efficiency. But they weren't unprepared. Chloe had already backed up the full archive on a personal drive. Marcus began scanning physical entries and saving them to cloud storage. It wasn't rebellion, it was preservation. They weren't trying to burn the building down, they were just trying to ensure the stories inside didn't disappear. By Friday, the HR department announced reflection sessions, mandatory curated meetings where employees could safely process workplace dynamics. The sessions were scripted, sanitized. No mention of the archive, no mention of Marcus. In one session, Chloe watched a facilitator click through a PowerPoint titled "The Power of Listening" and almost laughed out loud. That night, she met Marcus behind the cafeteria loading dock, under a flickering yellow bulb. "They're replacing honesty with theater," she said. "They always do when the truth gets too close," Marcus replied. "That's why we write it down." Meanwhile, an unexpected ally surfaced. Joseph, the quiet man from the early workshops, approached Marcus with a brown envelope. "I used to work in compliance," he said. "I still have access to older HR records. You might want to see these." Inside were anonymized exit interviews, going back 7 years. Patterns emerged. People of color leaving at higher rates. Repeated complaints of being overlooked for promotion. Dismissals that followed whistleblower comments. It wasn't just a culture of silence, it was a system of quiet attrition. "They don't need to fire you to erase you," Marcus murmured, scanning the documents. "They just make you want to leave." That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, documents spread out like a battlefield, coffee going cold beside him. In the quiet, memories surfaced of Ayumi, of their tiny apartment in Queens, of her laughter filling the room while jazz played low on the radio. She had believed in his voice before he did. She had believed the world could change if enough people told the truth at the same time. Marcus picked up his phone and recorded a voice memo. Not for anyone specific, just a message. "They tried to clean the floor by hiding the dirt, but now the dirt has a name, and that means it has power." The next morning, the building woke to something new. Dozens of pages from the archive had been printed and taped to the inside of bathroom stalls, inside elevators, slipped under office doors. No names, no accusations, just voices, raw, unedited, unapologetic. And in the middle of the lobby, where the corporate poster once hung, someone had placed a new sign: "Truth is not a disruption." No one saw who put it up. No one took it down. That afternoon, Saori held an emergency staff meeting. "There will be no investigations," she announced. "No witch hunts. This company will not punish honesty. We will learn from it." Her voice was steady. Her eyes found Marcus in the back of the room. A flicker of solidarity passed between them. After the meeting, Lambert confronted her in the hallway. "You're making enemies," she smiled coolly. "Then I'm finally doing something right." Marcus returned to the janitor's closet later than usual that evening. As he stored the mop and hung his keys, he noticed a small envelope on the shelf. No name. Inside was a single note. "Keep going. We're with you. S." He didn't need to know who S was. What mattered was that someone else still believed the floor could be more than reflective surface. It could be foundation. He folded the note, slipped it into his pocket, and exhaled slowly. The fight wasn't over. In truth, It was only just beginning. But now the silence had cracks, and through those cracks, light was starting to pour in. "Did you read it?" Marcus asked quietly, leaning on his mop handle as Joseph approached him near the freight elevator. The older man nodded, his expression unreadable. "Every word. The older files, the new entries. This company's been running on silence for years." Marcus exhaled, adjusting the strap of his work bag. "And now that silence is cracking." Joseph offered a tight smile. "And that's when the walls usually start shaking." It was Monday, and there was tension in the air so thick even the temperature felt different. Conversations that once danced freely near water coolers now died down when certain people walked past. Marcus wasn't being called to HR or questioned anymore that would have drawn too much attention. Instead, he was watched, quietly, closely. People noted his breaks, his routes, even the length of his conversations. But that wasn't what worried him. What worried him was Chloe. She hadn't shown up since Friday. No messages, no responses, nothing. He asked around, cautiously. "Out sick," someone said. "Family emergency," whispered another. But none of it felt right. He finally knocked on her apartment door late that evening. No answer. But from down the hall, a neighbor spoke up, a woman in her 50s with a sharp bob and a soft voice. "You're her friend?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "She left early Saturday, looked upset, carrying a suitcase. Did she say where she was going?" "Only said she needed to get away from the noise before it crushed her." The woman paused. She looked scared. Marcus sat on the front steps of the apartment building for a long time after that, the city buzzing around him like a world that refused to notice when someone disappeared. He pulled out his phone and reread their last texts. The last thing she'd sent: "If they silence me, don't let it end with me. Keep the story alive." His fingers tightened around the phone. Chloe had been more than a colleague. She was the spark, the one who reminded him that even the smallest truth, whispered at the right time, could roar. The next morning, Marcus arrived earlier than usual. He moved through the halls like a ghost, leaving small handwritten notes in hidden places taped beneath chairs in the break room, tucked into vending machine slots, pinned behind bathroom mirrors. The notes were simple. "You are not alone. Truth is still here. They can't erase what we remember." He signed none of them, but anyone who had been paying attention would know. Meanwhile, upstairs, Saori was preparing for the quarterly executive meeting, a high-stakes event, now weighted with more tension than ever. The archive had changed the company's DNA. No one could pretend otherwise. She reviewed her notes, aware of the risk she was taking. She would not follow the script. She would not offer empty reassurances. She would tell the truth, and let the consequences unfold as they must. At 9 a.m., the meeting began. Lambert opened with performance charts and quarterly margins. Others chimed in about cost control, market expansion. It was business as usual until Saori stood. "Before we continue," she said, her voice steady, "I'd like to speak about culture." The room shifted. Eyes rolled subtly. Pages stopped turning. "We've seen employee morale drop. We've seen departures increase. But behind those numbers are stories, stories that explain more than our spreadsheets ever will." Lambert frowned. "Saori." "No," she interrupted, still calm. "You had your turn, now it's mine." She pulled out a printed sheet and read aloud. "I used to love this company, but now I feel like I have to hide who I am to keep my job." Another page. "No one notices the janitor until he speaks. Then they get nervous." A third. "I smile through the pain because that's easier than asking for help. But every day, I wonder if anyone would care if I stopped showing up." She looked up. "These are not attacks. These are reflections. If we cannot face them, we do not deserve the loyalty we demand." A deep silence followed. Lambert cleared his throat. "And how, exactly, do you plan to lead a company built on unrest?" Saori looked around the table. "By embracing the unrest, by honoring it, and by empowering the people who've had to whisper in stairwells to finally speak in boardrooms." Not everyone clapped, but no one interrupted again. Downstairs, Marcus received a text from a number he didn't recognize. Just one line. She read it out loud, in front of all of them. He smiled. The ripples had become waves. That afternoon, a new addition appeared in the lobby. A digital screen mounted beside the elevator bank. It cycled through anonymous excerpts from the archive with a soft header. "Voices of our people, There were no names, no accusations, no spin, just truth, public, permanent, and beneath the screen a plaque, "Change begins with the courage to be heard." Marcus stood before it for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a post-it. He wrote in neat, careful script, "Even floors need cracks to breathe." He stuck it quietly on the corner of the screen, turned, and walked back to his mop. Later that evening, Saori sent him a short message. "We're not done, but we're no longer alone." Marcus stared at it for a while, the words echoing louder than any speech. He thought of Chloe, wherever she was. He hoped she saw this somehow, somewhere, because this wasn't just survival. This was testimony. This was the beginning of something none of them could yet name, but all of them felt rising, like a tide, like justice whispered through vents. And Marcus, tired but unbroken, returned to the closet, ready for whatever came next. When Marcus arrived Tuesday morning, something had changed. The building no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a question, one waiting for answers. People greeted him with brief nods, some with subtle smiles, others with averted eyes. But there was no more pretending he didn't matter. The digital screen in the lobby continued its quiet loop of anonymous entries, and every so often, Marcus would catch someone reading. Not scrolling on their phone, not chatting with a coworker, just standing still, reading, absorbing, feeling. He headed straight for the basement archives. Joseph was already there, hunched over a table, sorting through a stack of old printed onboarding manuals and employee exit forms. 3 more left voluntarily after reporting harassment, Joseph murmured without looking up. All 3 were women, 2 of them people of color. No follow-up investigations, just disappearances. Marcus ran a hand over his shaved scalp, frustration tightening in his chest. The pattern's not just real, it's designed. Joseph looked up, nodding grimly. And now that we've seen it, we can't unsee it. Meanwhile, upstairs, Saori received a formal letter in a sleek envelope slid under her office door. Inside, a notice of censure from the board. The language was veiled but sharp, accusing her of bypassing protocol, inciting unrest, compromising investor confidence. It ended with a request: refrain from further public comments until internal review is complete. She read it twice, then calmly set it aside. This wasn't unexpected. It was a reaction from a system threatened by daylight. At lunchtime, Marcus met with Sophia, a junior marketing associate who had quietly become a loyal supporter. "I've been collecting messages," she whispered in the back stairwell, slipping him a thumb drive. "From people who are afraid to speak publicly. They trust you." Marcus held the drive, small and warm in his palm. "Why me?" She hesitated. "Because you never asked for power. You just told the truth. That matters." He nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy but clear. "Then we'll keep going. Quiet, but not invisible." That afternoon, an anonymous email appeared in company inboxes. Subject line, "What they don't want you to remember." Inside was a link to a site mirroring the digital screen, only this one allowed users to submit new entries, read old ones, search by keyword. It was sleek, untraceable, secure. Chloe's fingerprints were all over it. Marcus smiled softly. She was still out there, still fighting. The archive had evolved. The board panicked. By evening, legal counsel had issued a company-wide data ethics reminder, warning against the dissemination of non-sanctioned internal communications. But it was too late. The archive was no longer a file. It was a movement. In the finance department, a woman named Denise began printing excerpts and leaving them in staff mailboxes. In the warehouse, a forklift driver wrote a message on a crate: "We are more than your quarterly losses." And in HR, someone updated the department's mission statement board with a sticky note that read, "If your silence protects power, it's complicity." And Saori watched it all unfold from her office, fingers tented beneath her chin. She was being edged toward a decision: fall in line or fall apart. But she wasn't alone anymore. That evening, she called Marcus. "They're tightening the leash," she said, her voice steady but lower than usual. "I received a warning today. If I push further, I could lose everything." Marcus didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was calm. "Then maybe it's time we push together." A pause. "I don't want you to lose your job. And I don't want to lead a company that fears honesty." Another pause. "Are we sure this is the hill?" Marcus exhaled slowly. It's the only one that matters. The next morning, Lambert convened an emergency board session. They needed a scapegoat, someone to blame, someone expendable. Rumors swirled that Saori's position was being reviewed, that she might be asked to step down. But before anything could be finalized, she made her move. That afternoon, Saori sent a company-wide video message. No marketing polish, no legal approval. Just her, seated in a plain chair in a nondescript conference room. "I came to this company because I believed in its mission," she began. "I believed in innovation, integrity, and above all, inclusion. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that inclusion isn't just a policy, it's a practice. And truth isn't a threat, it's a tool." She continued, voice unwavering. "I've read every line of the archive, and while some may see it as rebellion, I see it as reflection, necessary, overdue, and deeply human. If that belief costs me my position, then I accept that, but I will not apologize for choosing people over pretense." The video ended without music or credits, just a fade to black. And yet, across departments and break rooms and home offices, it echoed louder than any executive speech had before. Lambert was furious. He drafted immediate legal action, but even he couldn't stop the shift. Momentum, once ignited, doesn't ask for permission. That evening, Marcus sat on the rooftop of his apartment building, the city buzzing below. He scrolled through new archive entries. One read, "For the first time, I don't dread Mondays." Another, "We see you, Marcus. Thank you." A third, "She said what we've all been too scared to say." His phone buzzed. A message from Chloe, just one line. "They tried to bury us, but we're seeds." He smiled, then laughed a sound full of weariness and wonder. And as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Marcus whispered to himself, "Let them come. We've already won the part that matters." By Wednesday morning, the archive was no longer a whisper. It had become a storm. Every department in the building was talking. Quietly at first, then more boldly. People left handwritten notes on bulletin boards, formed circles during breaks, and looked each other in the eye in ways they hadn't dared before. Something had cracked open, and the silence was bleeding out. Saori entered the building through the back entrance. Her assistant had warned her that media outlets were beginning to catch wind of the internal unrest. A journalist from an independent publication had already reached out asking for comment. The board hadn't officially fired her, but they'd frozen her out, revoked her authority on new hires, removed her from sensitive threads, and rerouted departmental reports away from her desk. It was exile in everything but name. She walked down the hallway, her heels clicking against the tile, every step echoing louder than it needed to. As she passed by, employees fell quiet. Some nodded. Others turned away. But one thing was certain: they were watching. Marcus, meanwhile, had begun working later shifts, both by design and necessity. During the quiet hours of the evening, he coordinated with Joseph and Sophia to cross-check new entries in the archive with old payroll records, resignation files, and staff transfers. The patterns became unmistakable. People who had raised complaints were quietly pushed out. Departments with the most diverse hires had the highest turnover, and buried beneath quarterly reviews and sanitized HR memos was a machinery built to filter out dissent. He knew the next step would be risky, but it was time. That evening, Marcus drafted an open letter. It wasn't anonymous. It bore his name, his employee number, and his title, Janitorial Services. The letter began with a simple sentence: "My name is Marcus Carter, and I am no longer afraid." In it, he outlined his experience from being dismissed as background noise to discovering the archive, to watching colleagues vanish into bureaucratic shadows. He didn't accuse individuals by name. Instead, he laid bare a culture. "This isn't about revenge," he wrote. "It's about repair. We deserve better, and so do those who come after us." He submitted it to the internal newsletter and attached a PDF version that staff could print and share. Within 24 hours, it was everywhere in break rooms, pasted on locker doors, pinned above time clocks. Some even left copies on executives' desks. The board reacted with predictable panic. A memo was issued condemning unsanctioned communications, warning of potential disciplinary action for anyone participating in unauthorized media. But the threat rang hollow. They were losing control not just of the narrative, but of the loyalty they had taken for granted. That Thursday, Saori was summoned to a private meeting with the board's internal review committee. It was held in a sleek glass conference room on the 20th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a long table that gleamed with polished indifference. Lambert sat at the head. "Miss Araki," he began, "this review is not punitive. It's simply a necessary process to assess your recent decisions and their impact on company morale." Saori offered a small, unbothered smile. "You mean the morale that was already fractured when I arrived? Or the one people are finally speaking about because they see someone listening?" "You've taken unauthorized actions," another board member added. "You've compromised operational confidentiality." "I've honored human dignity," Saori replied. "If that's a compromise, then this company's values were never real to begin with." Lambert leaned forward, his voice lower now. "What's your endgame here?" Saori didn't flinch. "A culture where Marcus Carter doesn't have to write open letters just to be seen." There was silence. Heavy, pregnant. No decision was made in that meeting, but the tension confirmed what Saori already knew. Her position was no longer secure, but her integrity was. That night, Marcus was walking to his car when he noticed someone following him from the parking structure. He slowed, then stopped near the stairwell. "You lost?" he asked without turning. A voice responded, cautious but familiar. "Number just wanted to talk." It was Malik, one of the younger security guards. Marcus turned to face him. "Everything okay?" Malik looked around, lowering his voice. "I've been reading the archive. I saw your letter. My uncle used to work here, left 5 years ago. No one ever said why, just disappeared from the system. His name was Vernon Carter." Marcus froze. "Carter?" Malik nodded. "He's your brother?" Marcus stared for a long moment. "Half-brother. We lost touch years ago." Malik pulled out an old ID badge. "He left this in his locker. I kept it." Marcus took it slowly, emotions crashing like waves. Vernon had worked here, had fought the same battles, had disappeared in the same silence, and no one remembered. No one except this young man with sharp eyes and quiet courage. "He always said there'd come a day someone would finish what he started," Malik said. Marcus's throat tightened. "Then let's make sure we do." The next day, Saori returned to her office to find a note slipped under her door. No name, just one line. "They tried to erase voices. You amplified them. Don't stop." She smiled, slipped the note into her desk drawer, and opened her laptop. A new email waited in her inbox. Subject: Media Request, the CEO who listens. She didn't respond right away. She simply stared at it, letting the weight of what they were building settle into her bones. This wasn't just a workplace anymore. It was a reckoning. And as the sun set over the city, Marcus stood by the lobby screen, watching as new messages cycled through. The last one paused for a moment longer than the others. It read, "Justice isn't loud, it's relentless." And below it, the screen flickered, then reset, ready for the next truth. Friday morning arrived with the kind of eerie calm that suggested a storm was coming. The office building seemed quieter than usual, not empty, but still, the kind of stillness that came when people were holding their breath, waiting to see which way the wind would turn. The usual rhythm phones ringing, heels clicking, printers humming was muffled under a heavy blanket of anticipation. Marcus walked through the front entrance, eyes scanning the lobby. Something felt different. The security guards didn't glance at him. They nodded. That was new. Small, yes, but not meaningless. He headed to the janitor's closet, opened the door, and found a folded note taped to the inside wall. In neat handwriting it read, "Keep walking forward. We're right behind you." No name. No signature. Just truth wrapped in quiet solidarity. Upstairs, in the executive conference room, the board had called an emergency session. The agenda was clear: address the internal upheaval, contain the fallout, and finalize their decision about Saori's future. Lambert, with his usual measured arrogance, presented a slideshow about investor concern and potential media risk. Charts and projections filled the screen. "We're bleeding confidence," he said, tapping the pointer against the screen. "And this archive circus is poisoning our culture." A younger board member, Michelle Tran, raised her hand. "Or maybe it's exposing a sickness that's been here all along. Maybe culture doesn't break when people speak up, it breaks when they don't." Murmurs rippled around the table. Lambert frowned. "This is not the time for idealism." Michelle looked him square in the eye. "It's exactly the time." Meanwhile, In a small conference room on the 8th floor, Marcus met with Chloe. After weeks in hiding, she had returned quietly, slipping into the building before sunrise. She looked thinner, sharper, but her eyes burned with resolve. "I've traced the original suppressions," she said, pulling up her laptop. Lambert and 2 other executives were actively redirecting internal complaints away from legal. They created a shell filter in the HR system, a digital dead end. Messages went in, but they never reached review. Marcus clenched his fists. And nobody stopped them? Chloe shook her head. They made sure no one knew it was happening, but now we can prove it. At noon, Saori called an all-hands meeting. It wasn't official, it wasn't sanctioned, but people came anyway. The large cafeteria was filled to standing room only. Department heads, interns, technicians, even warehouse workers. No cameras, no speeches, just people. She stepped to the front with no podium, no slides, just presence. "I wasn't born here," she began, her voice calm, clear. "But I chose this place. I chose this company. Because I believed in what it could be, not just what it was." She paused, looking around the room. But belief alone doesn't build justice. Action does. And silence, well, silence is how injustice survives. She turned slightly, gesturing toward Marcus, who stood quietly near the side wall. "Some of you know Marcus. Some may have passed him without seeing him, but his courage, his honesty, his willingness to be more than what this place expected, that's what leadership looks like." Marcus shifted uncomfortably as dozens of eyes turned to him. For a moment, he wanted to shrink, to fade back into the comfort of invisibility. But then he caught sight of Malik, nodding slowly, Chloe, watching with quiet pride, Joseph in the back, arms crossed, eyes wet, and he stood straighter. Saori continued, "The archive is not a scandal, it's a mirror. And maybe what we see isn't flattering, but it's necessary. Because until we tell the truth about who we've been, we can't become who we say we are." The room was silent. Not empty silent, but charged silent. The kind of silence that precedes applause or revolution. A single clap broke through, then another, and then the room erupted. It wasn't just support, it was relief, release, recognition. For the first time, the truth had been spoken aloud in front of everyone, and no one had turned away. Outside, however, Lambert watched through the glass wall with a tightening jaw. His control was slipping. He knew it. The media was circling. Investors were beginning to ask questions he couldn't spin. And now, Saori had the floor and the people. In the following hours, something remarkable happened. Departments began organizing themselves. HR associates formed a task force to audit past complaints. Marketing staff started drafting a public-facing transparency campaign. IT technicians backed up the archive, encrypted it, and made it accessible from outside the building, ensuring it couldn't be shut down. For the first time, the company began functioning not as a hierarchy, but as a community, and it wasn't chaos, it was clarity. That night, Marcus returned to the janitor's closet. He opened his locker and found a small envelope taped inside. This time, there was a name, Vernon Carter. Inside was a letter, typed, dated 5 years ago. It had never been sent. "To whoever finds this," it read, "I don't know if I'll make it through this place. But if I don't, know that I tried. I spoke up. I knocked on every door I could, but they were locked. Maybe someone else will have better luck. Maybe someone else will be heard." Marcus read it twice, then again. His hands trembled as he folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. He walked up to the rooftop again. The city glowed around him. Saori joined him 10 minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without speaking. They stood side by side, letting the hum of traffic and the breeze fill the silence. "They're going to try to replace me," she said finally. Marcus took a sip, then nodded. "They might." She turned to him. "But they can't replace what's already started." He smiled. "Number they can't." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever regret speaking up?" He looked out over the city. "Only that I waited so long." In the distance, the first light of dawn began to break through the dark. Not loud, not flashy, just persistent, like the truth, like justice, like Marcus. The following Monday, the building pulsed with a different kind of energy. People arrived early, not out of obligation, but anticipation. Rumors had spread that the board was preparing a final decision about Saori. The archive had already reached external eyes. An expose was scheduled to drop by noon in a major online journal, and deep inside the walls of the company, old ghosts were waking. Marcus walked the halls with a purpose. He was no longer just a janitor. He was a thread in the weave, part of a movement that refused to be unspooled. Malik handed him a flash drive. Video footage from 3 years ago. Your brother. He met with HR 4 times. This one shows him being escorted out by security. Marcus took the drive gently, like it held something sacred. We'll use it, but not out of anger, out of clarity. At 10 a.m., the boardroom filled once again. Saori was seated at the far end, no longer excluded, but still surrounded by skepticism. Lambert cleared his throat. In light of recent events, the board has reviewed Ms. Ariki's leadership and determined that a change is necessary to restore public confidence. There was no surprise. It had been expected. But then, Michelle Tran stood up. Before we finalize anything, there's something you all need to see. She connected her tablet to the screen. The footage from Malik's drive played. Vernon Carter, shoulders squared, entering HR, speaking with conviction, pointing to documents then being led away, confused but not broken. Gasps rippled around the room. Michelle continued. This man raised alarms. He was ignored, then removed. How many others disappeared like this? And what did we do with their voices? Another board member, who had remained neutral, leaned forward. Is this verified? Time-stamped, cross, referenced with employment logs, and part of a pattern, Saori answered calmly. Lambert tried to interject, but Michelle raised her voice. What this company needs is not damage control, it needs healing. And healing starts with accountability. The room shifted. Not all at once, but visibly. Momentum was changing direction. Outside the boardroom, employees gathered by screens as internal feeds were shared messages of solidarity, fragments of truth, names of those who had been quietly edged out over the years, not out of retaliation, but recognition. Marcus sat in a quiet stairwell, staring at Vernon's badge. Chloe joined him, handing over a printed list. These are the names your brother filed in his last report. People he tried to protect. Some still work here, some don't. He scanned the list, a lump forming in his throat. He never stopped fighting. Chloe nodded. Neither did you. Back upstairs, the vote was postponed. Too many questions, too much uncertainty. But one thing was clear, Saori wouldn't go quietly. That afternoon, Marcus and Saori met in the cafeteria, now transformed into a kind of grassroots headquarters. Staff members brought old emails, testimonies, stories long buried under the weight of indifference. It wasn't formal, it was human. Do you realize what's happening? Saori asked, watching the conversations blossom. People are reclaiming the company from the inside out. Marcus looked around. This is what Vernon dreamed of. He just didn't get to see it. She placed a hand on his shoulder. But you did, and you helped build it. At 4 p.m., the media expose went live. The article painted a clear picture not just of the archive, but of the culture it had exposed. Saori's leadership was framed not as controversial, but necessary. Marcus's story was woven in like thread, quiet, resilient, powerful. Within hours, the company's social media exploded. Former employees spoke out. Clients demanded answers. The board, once so sure of its control, found itself cornered by transparency. The next day, Lambert was asked to resign. He didn't go gracefully. He cited conspiracy, chaos, betrayal. But no one listened, not anymore. His power had eroded not because someone took it from him, but because people stopped feeding it. Marcus watched from the maintenance hall as Lambert was escorted out the same path Vernon had taken years earlier. But this time, someone was watching, remembering. Saori was reinstated with full authority by week's end, but instead of returning to the top floor, she chose to work for a week from the shared space on the 3rd floor. No office, no title plates, just a laptop and a mission. That Friday, she called Marcus into the old conference room, the one where this had all started. I want to offer you something, she said. We're creating a new department, Cultural Integrity and Restoration. It'll oversee all hiring practices, whistleblower reports, and internal investigations. And I want you to lead it. Marcus blinked. You want me to lead? I want someone with a spine, with memory. with a reason not to let things slide. He hesitated. "I'm not an executive," she smiled. "Neither was I once, but I became one, and so can you." He looked down at his hands, calloused, honest, capable. "Okay," he said, "let's build something real." As they walked out, the lobby screen displayed a new message. "Every voice counts. Every silence echoes. Choose wisely." Staff passed by and nodded, not just at Sayori anymore, but at Marcus, with respect, recognition, gratitude. That night, he visited his brother's old neighborhood, stood outside the apartment where Vernon had once lived. In his hand, the letter. "We did it," Marcus whispered. "They heard you. They heard us." A soft breeze moved through the alley, not loud, but enough, just enough to carry a voice forward. Autumn came softly. The trees around the campus turned golden, and the air grew crisp with the scent of change, not the kind that comes from policy shifts or press releases, but the quiet, enduring kind that takes root in people's hearts. 3 months had passed since Lambert's resignation, since the archive had stopped being a rumor and become a reckoning. The company had changed its face, but more importantly, it had changed its spine. And at the center of that transformation stood Marcus, not as a symbol, not as a footnote, but as a man who stayed when others turned away. He walked now with different steps, not faster or louder, but heavier, grounded. Every corridor he passed through whispered back to him with acknowledgement, nods from executives, greetings from interns. Eyes that once glazed over now met his with sincerity. His new office wasn't in the high tower, but on the 4th floor near the training wing. He had chosen it on purpose. From there, he could hear the buzz of new recruits, learning not just systems and protocols, but ethics, responsibility, and the weight of silence. The Cultural Integrity and Restoration Department had started with 4 people. It now had 37. And every week, Marcus held what he called listening hours. No appointments, no formalities, just chairs, coffee, and time. People came with stories, concerns, confessions. He didn't solve everything, but he listened, and sometimes that was the beginning of everything. One morning, Saori dropped by unannounced. She wore jeans and a Columbia jacket, her hair loose. "Remember when they said we were both temporary?" Marcus grinned. "Yeah, now they're asking for our 5-year plan." She sat across from him. "We've been offered a partnership with the Department of Labor. They want to study our whistleblower system as a potential national model." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You think the world's really watching?" "I think," she said, "the world's tired of being quiet, and they're hungry for proof that change isn't a myth." Marcus turned his gaze toward the window, watching as a group of employees walked across the courtyard. Diverse, talking, equal. Then let's be that proof. That afternoon, Chloe led a staff training about digital ethics. At one point, she pulled up a blank screen and asked, "What does integrity sound like?" The room fell silent. Then someone in the back said, "Like someone saying what they're not supposed to say, but saying it anyway." Chloe smiled. "Exactly." Later, Chloe caught up with Marcus in the hallway. "I'm still not used to being believed," she admitted. "But I'm learning." Marcus nodded. "Me too, every day." That night, Marcus returned home to his small apartment. Malik had moved in 2 weeks prior after starting his new tech internship at a nonprofit. He was thriving, more open, less wary. As they ate dinner, mac and cheese with fried chicken, they talked about Vernon. Not as a ghost anymore, but as legacy. "You think he'd be proud?" Malik asked. Marcus took a moment before answering. "I think he'd be shocked at how far we've come. But yeah, proud, too." Malik nodded. "He'd probably still say you should wear better shoes to work." Marcus laughed. "That man hated my boots. They laughed until tears came. Not from pain, but from peace. The kind of peace that follows a long, hard climb." The next morning, Marcus received a letter, handwritten. No return address, just a note. "You don't know me, but I saw what you did. I was one of the quiet ones. I stayed silent because I thought it wouldn't matter. But now I speak. Thank you for teaching me how." He folded the letter slowly, hands trembling slightly, and placed it in a box beside Vernon's badge and the old note taped to the janitor's closet. The company held a ceremony at the end of the quarter. It wasn't flashy, no celebrities, no cameras, just truth. They unveiled a new plaque in the lobby. "For those who spoke, for those who listened and for those who will. Below it, etched in bronze, were the names of employees past and present who had contributed to the archive. Vernon Carter's name was first. Marcus stood beside Sayori as the crowd gathered. No speeches were needed, just presence, just witness. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long amber shadows across the building, someone played a recording from Vernon's last staff meeting, his voice calm, patient, unknowing of what was to come. One day, this place will have to answer for the things it pretends not to hear. And when that day comes, I hope someone's left who remembers the sound of truth. Silence followed. Heavy, beautiful. A woman in accounting wiped her eyes. A man from shipping whispered, "It's about time." Marcus closed his eyes and let the moment wash over him. Not for show, not for applause, but for healing. Later that night, Marcus stood alone in the same janitor's closet he had once called his refuge. The mop bucket still sat in the corner. The smell of old bleach lingered, but now the space felt different. It wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was history. He picked up the broom and smiled. "Never forget where you started," he whispered, "because that's how you know how far you've come." No. He turned off the light and stepped into the hallway. The building was quiet, but not empty. A hum of life moved through it, gentle but firm. The kind of hum that came not from machines, but from people who had learned to see one another, to hear one another, to believe one another. And as Marcus walked out the front door and into the cool night air, the city didn't seem so loud anymore. It seemed alive, awake, listening, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The story of Marcus and Sayori teaches us that true change often begins in the quietest corners, with people the world tends to overlook. It reminds us that integrity doesn't always roar. It often whispers, persists, and patiently waits for the right moment to rise. When one voice dares to speak truth in the face of injustice, it inspires others to do the same. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about restoring dignity, honoring memory, and building a future where everyone, regardless of title or background, is seen, heard, and valued.